Joining us now as we continue our 65-year tradition here at CBS News, bringing correspondents in at the end of the year to talk about the news of the year. David Martin, I think you were the first one. No, you weren't. I'm teasing.
What an easy joke.
Here's our
You'll take the soft target first.
Okay. Margaret Brennan covers the State Department, and congressional correspondent Nancy Cortez and Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett round out our group today. Let's just start right in, Garrett, because you pressed the president pretty hard at his news conference Friday about this idea of somehow giving amnesty to Edward Snowden.
Or a plea bargain or some sort of arrangement.
Do you think that the president is actually considering something like that?
Not presently, but those around him are, and it's a live topic. I think it's going to become more lively as this year goes on. It's hard to look at the panel's recommendation to the president or Justice Leon's decision earlier this week from the U.S. District Court and not look at the disclosures as something that has set in motion not only a political debate but a constitutional debate about the scope of U.S. surveillance, everything that is done in counterterrorism in the name of preventing terrorism that has touched upon average American lives in ways that may in fact be legitimate from a counterterrorism point of view, but are not viewed entirely legitimate by Americans once they were disclosed. That's an ongoing topic that will be part of the legislative debate on Capitol Hill. The president in mid-January is going to announce his own changes that he can carry out by himself to this surveillance program. But I think as the year goes on, Edward Snowden, his fate, whether there's a plea deal or amnesty, is going to become a political topic, a lively judicial topic, and something the president's going to have to decide on.
Well, I would say that would be the understatement of the year, that it will become a political topic. I think Capitol Hill would explode if the president somehow decided to give amnesty. I mean, can you imagine every single Democrat running for re-election would have to answer the question, do you think the president's right to give amnesty to Edward Snowden? I think it would create a political situation that would simply be untenable.
Not to mention the red meat that it would give to Republicans as they go into this election year. And it's been really fascinating to watch the evolution on Capitol Hill over the course of the year on this issue. At the very beginning, you know, when these revelations first came out from Snowden, the overwhelming reaction was, how dare he? Bring him back. He's a traitor. And I think a lot of people still feel that way. But as they started to hear from their constituents about what they felt was an intrusion into their privacy, you saw more and more members join the few who had been out there in the beginning, the Ron Wydens, the Rand Pauls, saying, we think that this program needs to be reined in. We're not comfortable with it. And that's why when these new recommendations came out this week about the NSA, there was sort of like a, yeah, that's about what we thought. You know, there are a lot of members who are glad that this is being tackled.
David?
The president said this is a conversation we needed to have. Raise your hand if you think we would have had this conversation without Edward Snowden.
Impossible.
It's hard to know what to think about the guy. Is he a traitor or is he a whistleblower who did the American public a service? And you can preach that flat around. I find it inconceivable that he will be granted blanket amnesty. But a plea bargain to a lesser sentence, I can see.
I think the president's going to have to be very, very careful about this, because after all, what would this say to the next person who thinks maybe it would be a good idea to dump a bunch of information out there, when he would say, oh, okay, well, I can go ahead and do this, and in the end they'll forgive me or something. I just don't think that'll happen. What do you think, Margaret?
Well, I think there are two sort of bigger takeaways from this entire incident, which is, one, add to the list of things that Russia can say has helped to make it a player of consequence once again on the world stage, and certainly taking in Edward Snowden was one of them. And secondly, and perhaps more profoundly in terms of long-term implication, will be the damage to alliance management. Alliance management is one of the key foreign policy tools of this administration. That means just getting everyone on board at the same time, whether it's about Iran, whether it's about any of the other challenges out there. And this really undermines trust along the lines of our European partners and others around the world.
And one of the things that's significant that was learned this week that the American public can digest on its own, in Judge Leon's ruling where he said it was likely unconstitutional, this blanket holding and collection of data, he said the government, given many opportunities, could not cite a single instance when this surveillance stopped or thwarted an emerging terrorist attack. The panel's recommendations also said we have not found conclusively where this has stopped a terrorist attack from happening. That's not information the American public had before. And that's going to increase the intensity of this debate, the utility of this particular kind of surveillance, and what role Edward Snowden played in releasing it.
But Mike Morrell will tell you that if this metadata program had been in effect on September 10th, 2001, it would have stopped or had a very good chance of stopping 9/11. So even though there is no case where this one program was the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful attack, there is evidence out there that it is useful.
Let's talk about the year in Washington. I must say, I can't think of a worse year that Washington has gone through, with the possible exception of Watergate, of course, which is kind of off by itself. What is going to happen on Obamacare now, Nancy? Is this program going to finally happen? I mean, is it going to, are people going to be enrolled, or are there still problems here?
Well, I think our first test will be January 1st when people have their new insurance programs. If they go to the hospital, if they go to their doctor, are they going to be able to get reimbursed? Are they going to be able to see the doctor that they want to see? And it's really still an open question. And this is really a challenge, I think, in particular, it's an understatement, for Democrats who are really in a bind. I mean, they have supported this. They have taken the slings and arrows on Obamacare for 4 years now. So they can't turn their backs on it. You know, it's their main accomplishment, and it's the president's main accomplishment. On the other hand, they do need to show that they think the program needs to be fixed. And going into an election year, every single one of them at some point in the past few years has said, if you like your doctor, you can keep him. If you like your plan, you can keep it. And you have to know that every Republican has found them saying that. They've got the tape, and they're going to be turning that into ads come this fall.
Of course, the other big story of the year was the shutdown of the government. I guess we're not going to see another of those for a while.
No. We have 2 years of budget peace, and that really is a reflection of the politics of exhaustion. The White House was exhausted by the Obamacare rollout fiasco. Republicans were exhausted by the shutdown and getting nothing out of it. And the Speaker, John Boehner, told his members, we're not going to get anything out of this. They said, Mr. Speaker, run into the buzzsaw yet again. He did it one last time, and then, as we saw, to create this 2 years of budget peace, said never again. And not only am I going to say never again, I'm going to call out the critics who want me to run into that buzzsaw again. Those politics are over. So I would say this was a down year as far as production, but it ended in a way that offers some degree of optimism for the White House and Capitol Hill that some things can get done. The National Defense Authorization Act was passed. That's a huge piece of legislation that will give the Pentagon some certainty for a while. 2 years of budget peace also allows a shutdown scenario to be completely wiped off the boards. The one last remaining element is, do we have a default crisis? Every political indicator at the White House and the Hill suggests we won't. So though it was a dreadful year productively, it ended in a way that gives both sides some sense that a midterm year will be calmer.
Let me ask David and Margaret. David, both of you, what will be the big stories on your beats this year at defense and at state?
Well, I think Syria is going to be a huge story, particularly if these chemical weapons, Syria's chemical weapons, are destroyed as planned. Because all along, the absolute worst case scenario in Syria has been those chemical weapons falling into the hands of radical Islamists. If you take those chemical weapons off the table, then that opens up a lot of actions that the U.S. could take to change the balance of power without having the dire consequence of those weapons falling into the wrong hands. Because right now they just are afraid of Syria imploding. But you get those chemical weapons out of there and the consequences just aren't as dire. However, I don't think they're going to do anything, the administration, until all of the chemical weapons are out, until the peace conference scheduled for January in Geneva has run its course.
Margaret?
Well, I would agree with David that Syria is going to be a story, and I think it's going to be the story for the next decade or more to come because of the consequences for the region. I think David's prediction there in terms of lack of action may be right. There is opportunity. There have been numerous opportunities over almost 3 years of conflict now. But we do know January 22nd, something will happen in Switzerland with these peace talks, but the question is still who's going to show up to the table. Assad has not shown himself to be the statesman that people had thought he might be able to be with the Russians pushing him towards the table. The U.S. still doesn't want Iran at the negotiating table, yet arguably their influence has increased in Syria. And the U.S. has decided, instead of picking a side and let's make sure they win, let's pick a side, give them moderate support, and see how they do. And the consequence of that has been the rebels fracturing. So
All right.
we don't know.
In a couple
what's
of
ahead.
sentences, what is your prediction for the new year, starting with Major?
The administration will approve the Keystone XL pipeline. John Podesta will use his power within the White House to create executive orders for the president, both on environmental regulation and economics, that will please the left displeased by the Keystone decision.
If Congress manages to do something big this year, and it's a big if, it will be immigration. It has already passed in the Senate. It'll look very different in the House, but members want to be able to show their constituents they have accomplished something going into the midterm elections, and they're not going to be able to tackle something like tax reform. The trust just isn't there.
The U.S. will sign a security agreement with Afghanistan and decide to keep about 5,000 troops there past 2014.
Margaret.
John Kerry has to become a closer. He's got to be Hamid Karzai's therapist, get him to sign that deal. He's got to get something done by April with the Israelis and Palestinians. He has to get the Syria peace conference going January 22nd. And we got 6 months to go with Iran here.
All right. And I predict that the president will not give amnesty to Edward Snowden. Back in a minute with some personal thoughts.